Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivana. Gauda Vaishnavinda ki, Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki, Prem Sakoshi Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar, Shivasari Gauda Bhakti ki, Founder Srila Prabhupada ki, Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath, Shamakun Radhakun Giri Govardhan ki, Vrindavan Dham ki, Mayapur Dham ki, Navadvip Dham ki, Jamuna Mai ki, Ganga Mai ki, Tulsi Devi ki, Bhakti Devi ki, Shri Radha Golokananda ki, Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda ki, Gaura Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Gauranga. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nit Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gora Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda. Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gora Bhakta Vrinda. So we're reading from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Leela, chapter 9, the desired tree of devotional service, and text number 34. And then next chapter, this tree will break down all those different devotees who make up this tree. Here we get in beginnings of it. So, text 34, Lord Chaitanya is here speaking. I am the only gardener. How many places can I go? How many fruits can I pick and distribute? Here, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu indicates that the distribution of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra should be performed by combined forces. Although he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he laments, how can I act alone? How can I pick alone? How can I alone pick the fruit and distribute it all over the world? This indicates that all classes of devotees should combine to distribute the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra without consideration of time, place, and situation. Of course, this is a huge challenge for all of us. You know, how do we get hold of somebody's attention and then hang on to it? And once you got their attention, you know, you got to be able to. This is even Lord Chaitanya when he went into Varanasi. You know, he made the same comment. I'm here to the marketplace, giving away free to distribute, but there's nobody that wants to take. You know, so he's asking that we all cooperate in some fashion. Sometimes, even me, you know, I'm not considered like a frontline preacher, but there's a lot of support activities that devotees can do to support preaching. It's all types of activities. You might not be the best preacher or be able to like get a hold of somebody's attention and capture it, but then you can support in so many ways that. So 35. It would certainly be a very laborious task to pick the fruits and distribute them alone. And still I suspect that some would receive them and others would not. Therefore I order every man within the universe to accept this Krishna conscious movement and distribute it everywhere. Even now it seems like it's crazy, the world, you know, it is, and how do you do it now? You know, how do you talk to people? And you can see that everybody is so engrossed in the bodily concept of life. It's huge. That not only is it the bodily concept so great, they have so many organizations that, you know, the Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter movement, and these are all just bodily concept. Feminist movement, these are all just different forms of the bodily concept of life. And they're all thinking, my problem is out there somewhere. But none of them are thinking, my problem is right here. I am my biggest enemy. And I realize this myself. I am my number one enemy. So how do you convince those people that they themselves are their problem? It's not the people that they're pointing fingers at as their problem. You know, we've discussed this even before. That even among women tend to be, even among, they are much harder on each other as a group than men are on women. I mean, you have these exceptions to the rule. You have some domestic violence, but on a whole, women can be far harder on each other than men on women because there's a social thing that they have to deal with each other, whether they're socially accepted, you know, even fashion or whatever. They're very critical of each other. Or if they have a tea party amongst their girlfriend, and if one of them is not invited to that party, it's like, you know, it's like the end of the world emotionally, you know, in their particular group. So it's reinforced. So having to preach to them to overcome this bodily concept of life, because in Bhagavad Gita, that's really the beginning of Krishna consciousness. And we still struggle with it. I know I do. You know, we not understand it, but practice it and coming off that level in itself is difficult, you know. And then we have this, and even communicating sometimes is very difficult to have to discuss it, you know. You know, and then you got the Black Lives Matter group now, And the reality, if you look at the statistics, there's a, Harvard's got a report that they did. They're pretty, credible to some people, Harvard, when they do it, that most of the suffering in the black community, 75% of it is coming from other black people. 75% of the crime is from within that community. And similarly, but it's hard to preach that. It's not the time you can actually preach. Some things you just can't preach at a particular time. You have to understand time, place, and circumstance, because they're not in a position where they can actually hear it. Or even though there are a lot of individuals in black bodies who understand that problem, they understand that that's where. So the idea is that when we preach that we are our number one problem, and how do we deal with that? We have to deal with ourselves. That's the issue that we have to. If you want to change something, you have to change yourself. That's ultimately the only person you can control. You can't control everybody else. You might think you control. That's lording it over. We have the propensity sometimes, but ultimately, we can only control ourselves. So therefore, Lord Chaitanya says, therefore, every man within this universe, he orders that they accept this Krishna conscious movement and distribute it everywhere. In the purport, in this connection, there's a song sung by Bilamangala Thakur in Echi Anusari, Maya Nasi Bara Lagi, Harinama Maha Mantra Lahu Tumi Magi, Bhaktivino Prabhu Charane Pariya. Say Harinama Mantra La Ila Magiya. The Sankirtan movement has been introduced by Lord Chaitanya just to dispel the illusion of Maya, by which everyone in this material world thinks himself to be the product of matter, and therefore to have many duties pertaining to the body. Actually, the living entity is not his material body. He is a spirit soul. He has spiritual need to be eternally blissful and full of knowledge, but unfortunately he identifies himself with the body, sometimes as a human being, sometimes as an animal, sometimes as a tree, sometimes as an aquatic, sometimes a demigod, and so on. Thus, with each change of the body, he develops a different type of consciousness with different types of activities, and thus become increasingly entangled in material existence, transmigrating perpetually from one body to another. Under the spell of Maya or illusion, he does not consider the past or future, but is simply satisfied with the short lifespan that he has gotten for the present. To eradicate this illusion, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has brought this Sankirtan movement, and he requests everyone to accept it and distribute it. A person who is actually a follower of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur must immediately accept the request of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu by offering respectful obeisances unto his lotus feet, and thus beg from him the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. If one is fortunate enough to beg from the Lord this Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, his life is successful. So here we have the success formula. But then how do you get people to take it? So this is getting people off the bodily concept of life is a big change in everybody's life. It's a huge change. It's what I guess you call a game changer that come off. I just saw something. It used to be this Carl Sagan. He used to be this scientist. He's not around right now. He's got cancer and died. But he was like this very popular scientist at one time. In I guess the 60s, 80s, or 70s. Now you have this other replacement, but he would have, and he made this statement that science has practically almost eradicated religion off the planet. That's what science has actually done, little by little, gradually by gradually, because right now, even as a slogan or figure of speech, people, we evolved from apes. So there's just like typically everybody. Because in school it's taught, it's hammered over and over again. When you chant something repeatedly, and when scientists hammer something, then people take on that particular consciousness. But he also kind of interesting. I saw a long time ago, maybe 30, 40 years ago, I actually saw him. He's pretty intelligent, good speaker. But he made a comment there talking about this timeline in the Bible. This, of course, Christians and Jews have a big problem with this timeline. That's one of their biggest problems they deal with in their preaching is this 3,000-year timeline. But then he kind of, because he's intellectual, but he said, well, how do you know how long one day is? You know, he's a scientist, but even preaching to Christians that we don't know the lifespan of day one it really is. You know, we talk about billions of years. So he kind of helping them with their own arguments, you know, about the lifespan of creation. But the scientists have actually winning the battle. So this idea of getting people off the bodily concept of life, these are the channels. The scientists are the Mayavadis that we have to deal with in this world. You know, they're huge. Even my own son, you know, grew up a devotee. Now he works in a hospital. He's in charge of the X-ray department, and he's like, scientists is just, he's been beaten down by scientists. He likes the kirtans, but other than that, there's no science backing up Krishna consciousness. He's been defeated. You know, his wife has got a PhD in microbiology, and it's like, how can you know, when they get this way, it's hard to overcome it, you know. So you had to, really the only thing is you have to completely continue to preach to a certain extent, but there's so much logic that you can actually beat a scientist with. I mean, life comes from life. You just can't beat that. You know, there's so much there. So Lord Chaitanya has given the order that we have to take what faith we have and that strength and use it to preach to the best of our ability. And success will be there. Okay, so number 37. So I am the only gardener. If I do not distribute these fruits, what shall I do with them? How many fruits can I alone eat? Purport. Lord Chaitanya, Mahaprabhu produced so many fruits of devotional service that they must be distributed all over the world. Otherwise, how could we alone relish the taste and taste each and every fruit? The original reason that Lord Krishna descended as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was to understand Srimati Radharani's love for Krishna and to taste that love. The fruits of the tree of devotional service were innumerable, and therefore he wanted to distribute them unrestrictedly to everyone. Srila Rupa Goswami therefore writes, Anarpita charam chitra karuna ya vitrina kalau samarpa yitam unoti tridojila rasam svabhaktim shriyam Hari Putra Sundara Dukti Kadamba Sandipitahi Sara Hridaya Kandare Sprutuva Sachinandana. There were many previous incarnations of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. None were so generous, kind, and magnanimous as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. For he distributed the most confidential aspect of devotional service, namely the conjugal love of Radha and Krishna. Therefore, Sri Rupa Goswami Prabhupada desires that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu live perpetually in the hearts of all devotees, for thus they can understand and relish the loving affairs of Srimati Radharani and Krishna. Of course, this is the ultimate goal that we have to achieve, but we have a ways to get there, you know, and this Raganuga platform that they're talking about. I was just, again, reading Krishna Karnamrita, and Bilamangala Thakur talks about these stages because it takes a lot of taste, you know, a lot of desire to have to achieve this. We have, and the greed really is what it gets down to. It's a prerequisite for the Raganuga platform. But if we're chanting sincerely and we maintain the instructions of the spiritual master, then as we chant, we get this, spruti will come. And he says it comes in three stages. It's the initial stage, then there's a confusion stage, and then there's the actual seeing Krishna, what is being described in this verse. And generally in the very beginnings, even in the Vaidhi platform, initial stages could be just a flash. When you're thinking about your Krishna, when you're chanting, of course we have it here. You see, these are actually, Prabhupada give us so much sprutis. We have so many paintings. We have the deities. These are actually images of the spiritual world. This is obviously on the Vaidhi platform, but this is all internal, this consciousness. But when this happens, initially it's a flash. Just like a flash is like less than a second within your consciousness. And then it might be a little bit more. But then the next phase, am I seeing what I'm seeing? This confusion state he talks about. And is this internally or externally? And what happens when this happens, when we get to this, because it all will happen at a gradual process, even initial phase, then what happens is there's this separation begins, because you actually get this vision. Without actually having met Krishna, you actually start feeling separation. And then this greed to see more comes, because the faith is also developed to the point where you get this flash. Of course, then he says it becomes confused, a confusion state. Whether is it real? Because the mind always is working you. What I'm seeing, is it really what I'm seeing? Is it internally? And then, of course, there's the final, when Krishna appeals. In Brihad Bhagavatam Rita, Gopakumar in the forest of Vrindavan at one point finally saw externally Krishna, our mind's eye. And it was, even in that stage, it was probably less than a second, because he's seen the Lord. He reached out to grab him, so Krishna stepped to the side, spun around, and then disappeared into the forest. So if you really probably calculated the time, it probably was far less than a minute that he had. And then he was like fainted, again, in this ecstasy of separation he feeling. So it begins with just being chaste in our Krishna consciousness. It's the value of that sometimes is not expressed enough. That if we want to move beyond this Vaidhi platform, we have to be very conscious of the behavior of our activities while we're chanting the Hare Krishna. And of course, there's a whole list of offenses to prevent from chanting the holy name. And these are so important aspects of our devotional service, because of the foundation that we build our Krishna consciousness on. It's a very important foundation. And then, of course, we have disagreements with devotees, and some of these disagreements are in Vaishnavas, or some of them are just family quarrels, and they're to be understood that way. Sometimes they're more serious, so we have to understand the difference between actual Vaishnava aparad and then blasphemy, which is the worst of all offenses. Actually, I read read a book by Jagadananda Pandit. He's got a book, and it's Sri Prema Vivarta. And most of the book, a little bit, he talks about his relationship with Lord Chaitanya, but most of the book is philosophy, it's quotes from the scripture. But he's known as the quarrelsome Jagai. That's his nickname, because he was always wanting to pick an argument with Lord Chaitanya. And he said on a daily basis I would quarrel. We know from Chaitanya Charitamrita there's he's actually Satyabhama in Gauralila. So, and these are examples of, and even between Nityananda and like Advaita, there's some really fierce arguments, and food fights and these other things. Sometimes they get to be a little bit of a scuffle. And Jagadananda Pandit, in his book, in the beginning, he talks about, he's a childhood friend of Lord Chaitanya. They went to school together. And sometimes they would get into arguments, and they would get into a little shoving match, and one time it got a little physical, and he described that he felt so guilty after. And Lord Chaitanya hadn't even revealed himself at this point. He was just young. That he spent the whole day and night lying in the Ganges just crying out of his grief. And then Lord Chaitanya came, and Gadadhar, they both came and found him, and he brought him back to his home, and he gave him something to eat. But these types of relationships are, of course, these are Nityasiddhas, even Kulavecha Sridhar and Lord Chaitanya would have amazing quarrels, and Lord Chaitanya would try to beat him down on the price of his palm leaves and banana leaves and his fruit, and we'd make cups and stuff, and it was just, these were such affectionate discourses, It was in the Chaitanya Bhagavatam, it describes that actually nobody actually knew who Kulavecha Sridhar was. None of the other Vaishnavas knew that he was a pure devotee. Only Lord Chaitanya knew at the time. and that he would argue with him, and then he would say, why are you take half of what you make, which is next to nothing, and you use it to worship the Ganges. I'm the father of the Ganges. Just, worship me, and then Kolavecha, Vishnu, Vishnu, Vishnu. You think, and then they would get sometimes physical. And then the Lord Chaitanya and of course the people would hear Kolavecha Sridhar at night. He would be crying in his Bhajan Kutir. He couldn't even fix the roof because he would spend half his money on the Ganges and it would leak. But they were thinking he was just hungry. He's just a very poverty-stricken Brahmin. But the truth about, and Lord Chaitanya would argue with him, I know how wealthy you really are. You can't hide your wealth from me. Because his real wealth was his bhakti, his devotion that he had for Krishna. And this was all internal. None of this was external. He never exhibited his love until late. He did actually exhibit it later on, after Lord Chaitanya started his Sankirtan movement. At that time, of course, when Lord Chaitanya called, he told the devotees, go get Kolavecha, when he was revealing who he was. He'd bring him here, and he showed him his forearm for him, and then, of course, he faints and he cries. And then when Lord Chaitanya would have a Sankirtan, at that point when Kolavecha heard a Sankirtan, public kirtan, then he would fall down and he would roll on the ground and cry. He couldn't maintain it anymore at that point. But prior to that, he was able to internalize the whole emotions, except at night, people heard and misunderstood his. So this purport is very very concise in as far as what Lord Chaitanya is trying to give us, this love of God, and that he himself is trying to taste this fruit, and then he's trying to distribute it. Rupa Goswami would say, if you could find it anywhere in the marketplace, purchase it immediately. And so we have the big market right here, and it's just up to us as Lord Chaitanya is ordering to distribute to the best of our ability. Obviously, we wouldn't want to turn people off. It's very difficult now. It's very few people are taking these fruits, and see, sometimes the most intellectual people are the most difficult to try to deal with. Okay, so 38. By the transcendental desire of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, water has been sprinkled all over the tree. And thus there are innumerable fruits of love of Godhead. God is unlimited, and his desires are also unlimited. This example of unlimited fruits is factually appropriate, even within the material context, for which the goodwill of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there can be enough fruits, grain, and other foodstuffs produced, so that all people in the world could not finish them. Even if they ate 10 times their capacity, this material world, there is actually no scarcity of anything but Krishna consciousness. If people become Krishna conscious by the transcendental will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there will be enough foodstuff produced so that people will have no economic problems at all. One can very easily understand this fact. The production of fruits, flowers depends not upon our will, but upon the supreme will of the personality of Godhead. If he is pleased, he can supply enough fruits, flowers, etc. But if people are atheistic and godless, then nature, by his will, restricts the supply of food. For example, in several provinces in India, especially Maharashtra, Uttar Pradesh, and other adjoining states, there is sometimes a great scarcity of foodstuffs due to lack of rainfall. So-called scientists and economists cannot do anything about this. Therefore, to solve all problems, one must seek the goodwill of the Supreme Personality of Godhead by becoming Krishna conscious and worship him regularly in devotional service. This is the solution to every single problem in the material world. There's no problem that cannot be solved by Krishna consciousness. 39. Distribute this Krishna conscious movement all over the world. Let people eat these fruits and ultimately become free from old age and death. Purport. The Krishna conscious movement introduced by Lord Chaitanya is extremely important because one who takes to it becomes eternal, being freed from birth, death, old age, and disease. People do not recognize that the real distress in life are the four principles of birth, death, old age, and disease. They are so foolish that they resign themselves to these four miseries, not knowing the transcendental remedy of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Simply by chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, one can become free from all anxiety. But because they are enchanted by the illusionary energy, people do not take this movement seriously. Therefore, those who are actually servants of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu must seriously distribute this movement all over the world to render the greatest benefit of human society. Of course, animals and other lower species are not capable of understanding this movement. But if even a small number of human beings take it seriously, then by their chanting loudly, all the living entities, including even trees, animals, and other lower species, will be benefited. When Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu inquired from Haridas Thakur how he was to benefit living entities other than human beings, Haridas Thakur replied that even the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra is so potent that if it is chanted loudly, everyone will benefit, including the lower species of life. And this is true, you know. Of course, you have this virus now, and everybody's trying to hunker down. And how do you overcome preaching in that too? That's also a problem that has to be overcome. I don't know if you heard this also, but I just heard some devotee tell me that some of the executives of Zoom, right, said, "What do the Hare Krishnas got to talk about for 3 hours?" Because they realize that all over the world, Zoom is being like the number one thing now since the coronavirus everywhere. But the devotees are using it for preaching, meetings, all kinds of things. And so, of course, they know because of their computers, they can tell how much traffic is going on. So devotees are intelligent. They also need to adapt, in their preaching, and that's one of the ways they adapt. So it's kind of funny, I guess most meetings aren't, 2 to 3 hours, but it was. So in addition to that, in order to be able to preach successfully, and there's a nice conversation with Allen Ginsberg in 69, I think, in Columbus, Ohio. And he's kind of interesting because he's got Prabhupada, him and Prabhupada are discussing. And he's wanting to, preach. Okay, you got everything's going pretty good. He recognized he got this success. I don't know how many, 69, there, could have been, half dozen temples or, maybe close to 10 temples at a time. And he could see that Prabhupada's being successful. But then, how are you going to actually, not everybody's going to take to this dress, not everybody's going to deal, he's like trying to hammer this one point, how are you going to be able to preach to everybody, even though, and Prabhupada was like, that's basically what he's doing, he's being successful, he is working, and people are changing. But Allen Ginsberg keeps bringing it back to this point that not everybody's going to shave their head. Not everybody's going to put on this dress, How are you going to preach to the truck drivers, And so Prabhupada understood, he kept trying to explain to him that you have to have a foundation of preachers, Not everybody's going to teach, not everybody's going to become Brahmins, rabbinical, but you have to have that aspect of the preaching society for it to be successful. You got to elevate a certain class of people, and he just mentioned this, just if it's a small percentage of people become Krishna conscious, then you can change the world. This is what he said in this purport. But even a small number of human beings take it seriously, he says. So he's trying to counter with Allen Ginsberg this point, that if he's successful in this small number, then ultimately it would be successful on a larger scale, And of course, Allen Ginsberg was kind of, and you see this, that Prabhupada often was like, his method, they didn't understand his method of preaching. But Prabhupada understood the quality of the preacher was really what's important. And that in his lectures he says that you have to come to the platform. If you want to be a very successful preacher, you've got to become an Uttama Adhikari. And then you come back down to the Majjhima Adhikari. If you come to that stage, then you can be extremely successful in preaching. So that's, again, we talk about, we mentioned this in this class here, but how important it is that we work on our foundation of our spiritual life. Because from that, it's so important that we're not going to move beyond it until we are honest about our practice ourselves. I know myself, I have to constantly remind myself that if you're going to have an impact, even if it's in a support role, which I look at myself as not a frontline preacher, I look at myself as a supporting role. I kind of feel myself in that I can help others who are much more better at preaching and more successful at that. I can do better if I support them. And so, because everybody has a part to play, in whatever, small or large, while we are continually practicing and trying to come to the level that's being expressed here in this Chaitanya Charitamrita. Anybody have any comments, anything, want to say anything? We can. You have Yeah. Yeah. Well, but religion is important because it's a foundation. Because religion, if practiced properly, brings one to the mode of goodness. See, that mode of goodness is good for chanting Hare Krishna, because we talk about chanting in a offenses, without offenses. So that means mode of goodness, without cheating of different types. So a proper religion is free from cheating to the best of its ability. Those who practice religion. So religion has value, but we know today, and the Lord Chaitanya even said it in its numerous places, and he's preaching to Sanatana Goswami, that the majority of people don't practice what they preach in religion. He starts off this conversation at Chaitanya Charitamrita. We'll get there in Madhya Lila, chapter 19, I think it is, and he that's how he starts the conversation, with majority of people don't practice what they preach. And among those who do practice, hardly one of them actually even knows the purport of the ultimate truth, or even perfect. And even those who are perfect in their practice, hardly one of them knows their relationship with Krishna. So, he breaks the numbers down, that away. But obviously the Maha Mantra is the ultimate, and we have to work on ourselves as individuals. The more we have, and that's why I started off talking that way. In society today, we see it's a me society, and we see that society it's all about me, and you have all these social groups, and they're all bodily concept groups. Every single one of them are all based on the bodily concept, and they're all thinking the problem is out there somewhere. But my group has the answer, but it's just reinforcing a problem that's perpetual, that they're on the bodily concept of life. They don't understand that they're not this body. And so that's one of the big things we have to get across, that point. It's very difficult to get that point across. Anything else, anybody? I read another verse if you know. Yeah, but how do you get that good heart? That's the Lord Chaitanya. That's the purpose of Vedic literature. It's Sambandhana, Abhidheya, and Proja, all the Vedic literature. So it brings us, how do we get that heart? And the purpose of having a clean heart is that what's in there, you'll have the vision to see what's really in our heart. And that's the Supreme Personality of Godhead is residing there. Right now, it's covered over. So the practice is to clean the heart so we can see. Okay. That's right. Thank you for reminding us. Okay. I can read one short one here. Text 40. If the fruits are distributed all over the world, my reputation as a pious man will be known everywhere. How about that? And thus all people will glorify my name with great pleasure. This prediction of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is now actually coming to pass. The Krishna conscious movement is being distributed all over the world through the chanting of the holy name, the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, and the people who are leading confused, chaotic lives are now feeling transcendental happiness. They are finding peace in Sankirtan, and therefore they are acknowledging the supreme benefit of this movement. This is the blessing of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. This prediction is now factually being fulfilled. And those who are sober and conscious are preaching the value of this great movement. Okay, that's a good one to end on. Okay, very nice. Really, the problems today are the same as it was 50 years ago. It's not that it's harder to preach. Prabhupada is just as successful today as he was 50 years ago because of who he was. He was an Uttama that came down as the Madhyamam, was able to effectively preach. And he said that we just have to follow the same process, and we could be successful. Same process, and we could be just as successful. It's not that Maya is stronger than Krishna's internal energy. You know, Krishna could, the power is there. Okay, all glories to Shri Guru and Gauranga. Hare Krishna.
Govindam Adi Purusham